Welcome, everyone, to another deep dive. We love to take these deep dives into all sorts of interesting topics. And today we are going to be talking about sexual alchemy.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yes, and we're going to be looking at specifically Donald Tyson's book, Sexual Alchemy, Magical Intercourse with Spirits.
Right.
So before we get started, I do want to mention that this topic is one that we're going to be approaching impartially. We're going to present Tyson's ideas.
Right.
We're not here to endorse them. We're not here to refute them, but just got to present them as they are and let you, the listener, make up your own mind about what you think. So with that said, this book really explores the idea that there's this connection.
Yeah.
This historical and spiritual connection between human sexuality and alchemy, this idea that sexual energy can be used for.
Yeah, it's amazing how he links these two seemingly disparate topics together,
Right.
suggesting that this energy can be harnessed for transformation and spiritual growth.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating premise, and he goes into a lot of different areas in the book. He talks about, historical examples of human spirit encounters, the role of the goddess in this whole thing, the concept of the homunculus, which is a being created through alchemy.
Like an alchemically created being.
Yeah, and even practical techniques like the middle pillar exercise, which we might get into a little bit later. But he even claims to have invoked a spirit using these techniques.
Yes, he does, and that's something that we will touch upon as well.
Right, so let's just jump right in. So where do we even begin with this whole concept of spirit sex? Is this as fringe an idea as it sounds?
It's not necessarily as fringe as it might appear at first glance.
Yeah.
These ideas are actually woven into the fabric of history and religion more than people might realize.
Okay.
For example, you have the Book of Enoch, which describes the Watchers, these angels who mated with human women,
Right.
which resulted in the birth of giants.
And we see this in other cultures as well, right? Like, I'm thinking of the Greek myths with Zeus and all of his escapades.
Absolutely. Greek mythology is full of examples of gods engaging in relationships with humans and, maybe not always with their consent, shall we say.
Right. Not always the most savory of encounters.
Right. And then as we move into the medieval period, we have the concept of the incubus and succubus, these male and female demons that were believed to visit people in their sleep for sexual purposes.
Yeah, definitely not your typical bedtime story.
No, not at all. But what's interesting is that you see this theme recurring throughout history and across cultures.
Right.
Whether it's a biblical, mythological, demonic, there's this element of otherworldly beings engaging in sexual encounters with humans.
So it's like this inherent human fascination with the idea, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, it really makes you wonder why this theme persists.
Yeah.
Why are we so fascinated with the idea of beings from other realms interacting with us in such an intimate way?
It's like this desire to bridge the gap between the physical and the spiritual, using the most intimate act that we know of.
Precisely. And speaking of bridging the gap, this leads us nicely into the role of the goddess in sexual alchemy.
Okay, so now we're getting into the realm of feminine power.
Exactly. We're talking about Shakti, the feminine principle of divine energy.
Okay.
In sexual alchemy, Shakti is seen as the driving force of creation, the very energy that animates the universe.
And this energy takes many forms, right? Like I know Tyson talks about figures like Lilith and the Queen of Heaven.
Yes, each figure embodies different facets of feminine power. So Lilith, for example, represents the raw, untamed aspects of female sexuality.
Okay.
While the Queen of Heaven archetype, you see this in figures like Mary in Christianity or Ishtar in Babylonian mythology. This represents a more regal and nurturing energy.
And how do these figures play into the actual practice of sexual alchemy?
Well, they offer different pathways to accessing and channeling Shakti. And Tyson introduces this concept of the left-hand path, which is a spiritual approach that embraces the darker, more taboo aspects of the goddess and of sexuality.
So that would run counter to more traditional religious views of sexuality, right?
Absolutely. The left-hand path challenges traditional morality and embraces the unconventional, which can be unsettling for some.
I can imagine. Yeah. So we've looked at historical examples of spirit-human interaction. We've talked about this powerful role of the goddess, but what other perspectives does Tyson bring into this whole alchemical mix?
Well, he also delves into Eastern traditions like Tantra and Taoism, which view sexual energy not as something sinful or to be ashamed of,
Right.
but as a potent force for spiritual growth.
Yeah, I've always found it fascinating how Eastern traditions approach sexuality in such a different light compared to a lot of Western religions.
They see it as a natural and sacred force, and they've developed all these intricate practices to harness and refine this energy for spiritual development. Have you ever heard of Kundalini energy?
Yes, I have. It's this powerful energy that's said to be dormant at the base of the spine, right?
Exactly. And Tantric and Taoist practices use specific techniques like breath control and visualization to awaken this Kundalini energy and guide it upwards through the body's energy centers, which are also known as chakras.
And this upward movement is supposed to lead to...
Well, it's believed to lead to heightened awareness, spiritual awakening, and even enlightenment. It's about transforming that raw sexual energy into a higher, more refined form of energy.
So it's not just about physical pleasure, but about a kind of transcendence and spiritual evolution.
Exactly. But it's important to note that working with this energy requires caution and respect. It's potent stuff and needs to be handled with care and awareness.
So we've touched on Eastern traditions, but how does Tyson approach alchemy in the West, especially in relation to sex?
Well, it's interesting because Western alchemy, with all its cryptic symbols and processes, it also incorporates sexual symbolism and practices, although it's often veiled in allegory and metaphor.
Right.
Remember the alchemical concept of the three mothers? Sulfur and mercury?
Yes, representing the body, soul, and spirit, right?
Right, and some alchemists believe that the interaction of these three principles, this kind of alchemical marriage, could lead to spiritual transformation and even the creation of the elixir of life.
So they saw a parallel between the union of these alchemical substances and the union of...
Exactly. And there are even deeper connections. Western alchemy is all about transmutation, turning base metals into gold. And some alchemists saw a similar process happening in sexual alchemy, where raw sexual energy is transmuted into spiritual gold.
So both Eastern and Western alchemy seem to view sexual energy as this raw material that can be refined and transformed into something greater. But Tyson also mentions this thing called a homunculus. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, the homunculus is basically an artificial being that's created through alchemical means. It's a kind of magically engineered life form.
So is he talking about creating life in a lab?
In a way, yes. Although he describes a couple of different methods, including using menstrual blood and semen or incubating a fertilized egg in a sealed vessel.
Okay, these are some pretty bold claims, and they definitely raise some ethical questions.
Absolutely. The idea of creating artificial life brings up a whole host of complex ethical considerations. And while Tyson does touch upon these, there are definitely points that we need to consider as well. But before we get into those, I think it's time to shift gears and talk about some of the practical techniques that Tyson outlines.
Okay, so he actually gives specific exercises for working with sexual energy.
He does.
Yeah.
And this is where his book gets really hands-on. He describes a technique called the middle pillar exercise, which is designed to channel energy through the body's energy centers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does this exercise work?
You basically visualize balls of light at specific points along your spine, each one corresponding to one of the chakras. And you start at the base of the spine and work your way upwards, visualizing each chakra as a vibrant spinning sphere of colored light.
It sounds similar to the Kundalini energy we talked about earlier, that upward flow of energy. But you mentioned Hebrew god names before. What role do those play?
Right, each chakra is associated with a specific Hebrew god name, and as you visualize the energy flowing through each center, you vibrate these names almost like chanting them internally.
So it's about attuning to specific divine attributes associated with each chakra.
Exactly. And breath control is also a key element. You use specific breathing patterns to help regulate the flow of energy throughout the practice.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together.
Yeah.
But this sounds pretty intricate. Is this something anyone can do, or do you need years of training in esoteric practices?
Well, Tyson does provide clear instructions in the book, but it definitely requires a level of focus and dedication. He really stresses the importance of patience and persistent practice.
So it's not about instant gratification or quick results, but rather a commitment to a long-term spiritual practice. What kind of benefits does Tyson attribute to this exercise?
He says that it can enhance your vitality, improve mental clarity, and strengthen your connection to the spiritual realm. He also considers it a foundational practice for some of the more advanced techniques that he outlines later in the book.
So it's about building those spiritual muscles, so to speak.
Yeah.
But I remember you saying that Tyson also cautions about the potential dangers of working with sexual energy. What are some of the risks involved?
Right. He's very upfront about the fact that this is powerful energy and it needs to be treated with respect. He warns against diving into the advanced practices without proper preparation. One of the dangers he specifically mentions is the possibility of attracting negative entities if you're not careful.
So it sounds like venturing into this territory requires knowledge and also protection. So speaking of those more advanced practices, what kind of things does Tyson explore?
This is where things get really interesting. He goes into detail about using sexual energy not just to summon spirits, but to actually interact with them on a deeper level, to even form relationships with them.
Okay, so we touched on this before, but how does one go about forming a relationship with a spirit?
Well, Tyson outlines a process that involves selecting a spirit-building rapport and ultimately achieving a kind of alchemical union with them. He emphasizes choosing a spirit that aligns with your personality and your goals.
So it's about finding a compatible spirit, so to speak. How do you go about choosing one?
He recommends using divination techniques like astrology or numerology to determine which spirits resonate with your energy and your intentions.
Okay, so once you've chosen a spirit, how do you actually connect with it?
Visualization is key here. Tyson describes techniques for channeling sexual energy to attract and connect with the spirit on a deeper level.
So I'm getting the sense that these visualizations involve a certain level of intimacy.
You could say that Tyson's approach is definitely unconventional. He describes it as a merging of energies, a shared experience on a different plane of existence that leads to a profound spiritual connection.
So more of an ethereal connection then.
Exactly. He describes feeling the spirit's presence as this warm, tingling sensation accompanied by a sense of deep connection and love. He says it's a very moving and transformative experience.
So it's less about physical gratification and more about a deeper, more profound energetic connection. But this brings up an important question. If these relationships with spirits are being formed, are they consensual? I mean, can a spirit even give consent in a way that we understand it?
That's a really crucial question. And to be honest, Tyson doesn't really address it as thoroughly as one might hope. He seems to assume that the spirits he's interacting with are willing participants.
Right.
But it does make you wonder, how can we truly know what a being from another realm is thinking or feeling?
It definitely raises some questions about the nature of consent and communication with otherworldly beings. But before we go too deep into the ethical considerations, I'm curious to hear more about Tyson's own experiences. Didn't he claim to have actually invoked a spirit using these techniques?
Yes, he describes successfully invoking a spirit and feeling its presence as that warm, tingling sensation, along with a sense of profound love and connection.
Okay.
He doesn't go into explicit detail, but he emphasizes that it was a very powerful and transformative experience for him.
So he's speaking from personal experience, not just theoretical concepts. But is there any way to verify these experiences? Or is it all subjective?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ultimately, it comes down to whether you believe Tyson's account or not. There's no scientific instrument that can measure the validity of these kinds of encounters.
And as we said at the beginning, we're not here to judge or validate those claims. We're simply exploring these concepts and allowing you, the listener, to form your own opinions.
Exactly. But even if you approach Tyson's claims with a healthy dose of skepticism, there's no denying that his work raises some really intriguing questions about consciousness, the power of belief, and the untapped potential of human sexuality.
It's definitely a thought-provoking journey, to say the least. And we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
In the next part of this deep dive, we're going to explore that middle pillar exercise in more detail.
Okay.
And we'll also delve into that fascinating concept of white and red powders that we mentioned earlier. So stay tuned as we continue our exploration of sexual alchemy and its fascinating blend of history, esoteric practices, and those thought-provoking concepts that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's a wild ride.
It is a wild ride.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. All right. So until next time, keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.
All right. See you then.
See ya.
Welcome back to our exploration of Donald Tyson's Sexual Alchemy. You know, we covered a lot of ground in that last part, and we're going to continue on with this fascinating material. And today we're going to be looking at a practical technique that Tyson describes in the book called the middle pillar exercise. So what exactly is this practice all about?
Well, the middle pillar exercise is essentially a technique for channeling energy through the body. And it's actually a central practice in many Western esoteric traditions.
Okay, so it's not something that he just came up with out of nowhere.
No, it's rooted in traditions like the Kabbalah and other mystical systems. And what Tyson does is he kind of adapts it to his system of sexual alchemy.
So how does it work? What does this exercise involve?
Well, imagine visualizing balls of light at specific points along your spine. Each of these balls corresponds to one of the chakras. And you begin at the base of the spine and work your way upwards, visualizing each chakra as this like vibrant spinning sphere of colored light.
Okay, so that's a pretty vivid image, and it sounds similar to that concept of Kundalini energy that we talked about earlier, that upward flow of energy. But you mentioned Hebrew god names in the last part. How do those play a role in this exercise?
Right, so each chakra is associated with a specific Hebrew god name. And as you visualize the energy flowing through each center, you vibrate these names, almost like chanting them internally.
So you're attuning yourself to those specific divine attributes that are associated with each chakra.
Exactly. And breath control is also a key element here. You use specific breathing patterns to help regulate the flow of energy throughout the practice.
I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, but it does sound pretty intricate. Is this something that anyone can do, or do you need years of training in esoteric practices?
Tyson does provide clear instructions in his book, but it definitely requires a level of focus and dedication. He really stresses the importance of patience and persistent practice.
So it's not about instant gratification or quick results. It's about a long-term commitment to a spiritual practice. So what are some of the benefits that Tyson attributes to this exercise?
He says that it can enhance your vitality, improve your mental clarity, strengthen your connection to the spiritual realm. And he also sees it as like a foundational practice for some of the more advanced techniques that he describes later on in the book.
Right, so it's kind of like building up your spiritual muscle, so to speak. But I remember you saying that Tyson also cautions about potential dangers of working with sexual energy.
Yes.
What are some of the risks involved?
He's very upfront about the fact that this is powerful energy and it needs to be treated with respect. He warns against just diving into those advanced practices without proper preparation. And one of the specific dangers he mentions is the possibility of attracting negative entities if you're not careful.
So it sounds like you need both knowledge and a certain level of protection when you're venturing into this territory.
Yeah.
So speaking of those advanced practices,
Mm-hmm.
what are some of the things that Tyson explores?
Well, this is where things get particularly fascinating. He goes into detail about using sexual energy not just to summon spirits, but to actually interact with them on a deeper level, to even form relationships with them.
Right, so we touched on this earlier, but how does one go about forming a relationship with a spirit?
Well, he outlines a process that involves selecting a spirit-building rapport and ultimately achieving a kind of alchemical union with them. And he stresses the importance of choosing a spirit that aligns with your personality and your goals.
Right, so it's about finding a compatible spirit, so to speak.
Yeah.
How do you even go about choosing one?
Well, he recommends using divination techniques like astrology or numerology to determine which spirits resonate with your energy and your intentions.
Okay, so once you've chosen a spirit, how do you actually connect with it?
Visualization is key here. Tyson describes techniques for channeling sexual energy to attract and connect with the spirit on a deeper level.
So I'm sensing that these visualizations involve a certain level of, well, intimacy.
Let's just say Tyson's approach is quite unconventional. He describes it as like a merging of energies, a shared experience on a different plane of existence that leads to this profound spiritual connection.
So it's more of an ethereal connection then.
Exactly. He describes feeling the spirit's presence as this warm, tingling sensation accompanied by this sense of deep connection and love. And he says it's a very moving and transformative experience.
So less about physical gratification and more about a deeper, more profound energetic connection. But this brings up an important question. If these relationships are being formed with spirits, are they consensual? I mean, can a spirit even give consent in a way that we understand it?
That's a really crucial question. And to be honest, Tyson doesn't delve into it as deeply as one might hope. He seems to assume that the spirits he's interacting with are willing participants. But it does raise questions about how can we truly understand the intentions and the feelings of beings from other realms.
Yeah, it's a complex issue that raises a lot of ethical considerations about interacting with otherworldly beings. But before we get too sidetracked by the ethical aspects, I'm curious to know more about Tyson's own personal experiences. Didn't he claim to have successfully invoked a spirit using these techniques?
He did. He describes experiencing a profound connection with a spirit feeling its presence as that warm, tingling sensation and this deep sense of love. And while he doesn't go into graphic detail, he emphasizes the transformative nature of the experience.
It's interesting how he speaks from personal experience, not just theoretical knowledge. But is there any way to objectively verify those experiences? Or is it all based on subjective perception?
That's the challenge with these kinds of claims, isn't it? There's no scientific instrument that can measure the validity of these types of encounters. Ultimately, it comes down to whether you believe Tyson's account or not.
Right, and as we mentioned earlier, we're not here to judge or to validate those claims. We're simply exploring these ideas and allowing you, the listener, to draw your own conclusions. But even if you approach Tyson's claims with a healthy dose of skepticism, there's no denying that his work raises some really fascinating questions about consciousness, the power of belief, and the untapped potential of human sexuality.
Yeah, it really pushes the boundaries of conventional thought.
It does. But we're not done yet. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore those mysterious white and red powders that Tyson mentions, and we'll delve into the ethical implications of all these ideas.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, so welcome back to our final part of this deep dive into Donald Tyson's Sexual Alchemy. We've been through a lot, haven't we? We've talked about historical examples, the role of the goddess, the middle pillar exercise, all this stuff. And now we're going to kind of wrap things up by looking at one of the most mysterious elements of Tyson's book, these white and red powders.
Right. These are really interesting because this is where Tyson's system really intertwines with Western alchemy. You remember those three mothers? We talked about sulfur and mercury representing the body, soul, and spirit.
Yeah, they're like the fundamental building blocks of reality according to alchemical philosophy.
Exactly. And the white and red powders represent an alchemical refinement of these three principles. They're not like actual substances you can just buy in a store.
Right.
But they're more like energetic essences that are created through a combination of physical and spiritual practices.
So they're like metaphysical concoctions then?
Yeah, you could say that.
But what is their purpose in this whole system of sexual alchemy?
Well, the white powder is associated with the feminine principle, with the moon, the goddess. It's said to enhance spiritual awareness, promote healing, and even grant a kind of mystical illumination.
Okay, so that's pretty potent stuff. And what about the red powder? What's its role?
The red powder is linked to the masculine principle, the sun, the god. It's believed to increase vitality, enhance magical power, and even prolong life.
Wow, they sound like spiritual power-ups.
Right.
But I imagine working with these energies must come with some risks.
Oh, absolutely. Tyson emphasizes the potential dangers of misusing these powders. He really stresses that this knowledge should only be entrusted to those who are prepared and who are ethically grounded.
So it's like a secret recipe that's passed down through an ancient lineage and only revealed to those deemed worthy.
Yeah, you could say that. It definitely adds an element of mystery and intrigue to the whole system.
It does. You know, we've encountered spirit sex, the power of the goddess creating artificial life, and now these mysterious powders with these almost supernatural qualities.
Yeah, it's a lot to process.
It is a lot to process, and all of these ideas, as fascinating as they are, they really do bring up some unavoidable ethical questions.
Oh, for sure.
You know, we've touched on the issue of consent when interacting with spirits, but there are other concerns as well.
Absolutely. Like, if sexual energy is as potent as Tyson suggests, what are the implications if it's misused? Could it be used to manipulate or harm others? And what about the creation of artificial life through the homunculus? Is that ethically justifiable?
Yeah, these are huge questions, and there aren't any easy answers. It's like we're opening a Pandora's box of ethical dilemmas.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to approach all of this with a sense of caution, discernment, and a really strong ethical compass.
Right. It's not about just blindly accepting Tyson's ideas, but engaging with them, critically questioning the assumptions, and ultimately forming our own conclusions.
Absolutely. And that's what we've tried to do in this deep dive. We haven't endorsed or refuted Tyson's claims, but hopefully we've provided you with a more informed perspective on this really complex and often controversial topic.
Yeah, we've explored the history, the philosophy, the practical techniques, and the ethical challenges, and now it's up to you, the listener, to decide what resonates with you and how you interpret these ideas.
Yeah, and if nothing else, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and maybe even inspired you to explore these hidden depths of human sexuality and spirituality.
You know, Tyson certainly makes a compelling case that there's more to these aspects of the human experience than we might initially realize.
He does.
So on that note, we leave you to ponder the mysteries of sexual alchemy.
Thanks for joining us on this wild intellectual journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep.